Libby Carlin is the Assistant State Auditor, and she's going to talk to us about policies for sound financial management.
Good morning, everybody. Brian is a hard speaker to follow. I don't have any scriptural stories. So, as Brian mentioned, I'm talking about policies for sound financial management. So whereas his session really was geared more toward board members, this is geared toward management. So a lot of times when we start speaking about financial management, even when we are in our audits and we talk to ITs, a lot of times we will hear from ITs that my accountants or my finance directors and others take handle the financial management aspect. So the heads of organizations don't often really involve themselves to the level of detail that I'm going to try and encourage today. So part of the reason for that, I want to let you know why I think that's so important for agency heads and to start thinking about financial management as being not just that core group of accountants and finance officers and treasurers and those groups, but it starts there in that core group. But also, what I encourage you to start thinking about it is everybody in the chain of commands above those individuals. And then anybody else, if you're in a large organization, you may have other people that are allowed to approve purchase orders or enter into contracts and that type of thing. So when you're thinking of financial management policies, it really should encompass anybody that has an impact on the financial health of your organization. And one of the reasons that I think that's so important, I think those of you that are in here, if you're an executive director or superintendent or an elected official will know this to be true. I think it's important because when something happens in your organization and financial management, everybody will look to you. They'll want to know, what did you know when there was a problem? What did you know and when did you know it? What are you going to do about it? Why didn't you do something about it sooner? So really, as all of you know, the buck stops with you as the agency heads. Most people I know didn't run for office or try to apply to be the heads of the organizations to be the head accountant. Nobody, I don't think, went into their roles with that objective. But the point of this is that in order to protect yourself and also protect your employees, protect your taxpayer dollars, and really effectively run the mission of your organization, you really need to get involved in some of these financial management policies. So we are focusing our summit on lessons that we've learned from the auditor's office. And as Brian mentioned, we have a lot of history in governments from all the audits and examinations that we perform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just speak about the most common weaknesses that we see in internal controls in our audits and special examinations that create opportunities for waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm going to focus on waste, fraud, and abuse just because of a lot of the problems that we keep hearing about. I think that's what most government officials are most concerned about in their organizations. But also, these same policies help prevent just typical errors or non-compliances, those type of things. So they're good, sound policy management, financial management policies to have in place in your organization. So then also I'll talk about tips for improving policies and procedures that really will help improve that accountability and help deter waste and abuse. So the first weakness that I want to talk about is improper segregation of duties or lack of segregation of duties. And I'm going to spend some time on this one because really this is the most common finding of any audit that we perform. First I'll define that for you. It's generally when we talk about lack of segregation of duties or problems with segregation of duties, we're talking about a single person in your organization that has the ability to really, they have a lot of functions under the belt, a lot of ability to post transactions to your ledgers, write checks or deposit checks, and then handle the reconciliation. So all along that process, they have the ability to control and possibly manipulate. As I mentioned, even if it's an error, errors are not likely to get detected by the person who caused the error, who made the error. So that's why one of the reasons why segregation of duties problems are such a big high-risk area for us. Another thing that is related to improper segregation of duties is circumvention of controls. We've seen cases in which the organization may have great policies and procedures in place. There may be somebody that's in a leadership position or in management in that organization that decides they really don't want to spend the time to implement those controls. Because, policies and procedures, when you implement them properly, they do take some time and they do take some attention. So we've seen things like pre-printing or rubber stamping of signatures on checks, especially when there's a dual system dual signature system of checks. What that does, even though that's a circumvention of controls, that basically negates that control altogether, so it causes a segregation problem. It puts in the hand of that person who's circumventing that control really too much control, so that errors can't be detected. Another thing that we see periodically in our audits is pre-printing purchase orders that have the approval signatures already on them. And so that's another way for, if you're in the leadership of your organization, that may be another time saver, but in reality, that allows a person who may be printing out those approvals to make purchases, to establish fake vendors, and do a lot of different things in the organization that you really want a control in place to detect. Whoever's job it is to approve those purchase orders, that person should really look at that process as a way to ensure that the money that's being spent for those types of purchases is really necessary and reasonable expenses of your government. So another way that we see circumvention of controls is through password sharing. And I know especially if you're in small governments and you may have bookkeeper Jane that goes on vacation for a week or two, and you want the ability to be able to write checks while she's gone. So there's some password sharing. That's some of the justification that we hear for password sharing. And even though as the head of the organization, you may say to yourself, you're willing to take on that level of risk just for a week, or you're only talking about a week or two while bookkeeper Jane's gone. The problem is, 9 times out of 10, Jane doesn't change her password when she comes back from vacation. So whoever she shared that password with is going to have that. And once she's back, you're not going to be able to tell, as management in your organization, whether bookkeeper Jane entered that transaction into your system or somebody else did, whoever she's sharing the password with. So it causes a lot of problems from that respect. And there's a lot of other things in password sharing, a lot of other ways that it can cause problems, but that's one of the things that we see. So, when I mentioned that it was the most common finding of the auditor's office, one of the things that I should also say is also the most common repeat finding. So it's not just one year finding and then it goes away. And a lot of times, there's small governments and they have maybe one bookkeeper on staff, so they have a really difficult time segregating duties. But, and so, I wanted to mention, there's other reasons why an agency, if they know this is a high-risk area and that there's potential for, if they have too many controls in the hands of one person, that it could cause, increase the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse, then why do they allow it to happen? So one of the reasons that we see is that agency heads and officials may not feel like they have the, necessary background or expertise to question their financial staff. There's some level of intimidation really when somebody has a skill or knowledge set that you may not have yourself. So I'm hoping by this conversation, we're here today just to initiate some discussion about ways to improve internal controls in your organization. So I'm hoping just by initiating that conversation, you start thinking about that as the head of the agency, you don't have to be a CPA, but what can you arm yourself with? What tools or training can you arm yourself with to improve those financial controls and improve the monitoring of those? Also, we hear a lot, probably one of our most common comments is that they're not sure, officials aren't sure how to handle the problem, how to fix it without some expensive solution. We hear all the time, we don't have the money to hire more accountants, bookkeepers, and treasurers. So I hope to give a couple of options, in that way, so that we can talk about effective and efficient ways to segregate controls and improve our financial management without necessarily going to immediately to the top level high expense options. And then another thing that we hear is that management trusts employees. They tell us a lot that, I didn't trust anybody else, so I hired my spouse. To do this is the only person, honestly, this is the only person that I trust. So this person I knew was not going to commit wastewater abuse, or I hired my children, because those are the people that I trust. And guess what? In the Commonwealth, we have had cases in which people's spouses and people's children have stolen from their agencies. So seriously, that is can you imagine being a mother or father and knowing that you've had siblings or children that have stolen, and you have to be the responsible party, the buck stops with you, so you have to address that, so it's really serious issues. The other thing I want to say as far as trust and management, everybody that commits a fraud probably has some level of trust within their organization. And, I'm not for not trusting employees. That's not a good way to operate. But, if you look at it from a different perspective, that I trust my employees, I want the best for my employees, so therefore, I want to have their back, and I want them to have my back. So you implement strong internal controls so that nobody can come in later and question your integrity, question your credibility, that type of thing. So, it's not, implementing those controls and oversight is not a negative thing to your employees. So let's talk for a little bit. I said I was going to spend a lot of time here, so talk about correcting the assignment segregation of duties. So if you have 2 or more financial staff, this is really a no-brainer. You shouldn't have any problem properly segregating duties within your organization, especially because you as the agency head should consider yourself somebody that can get involved in some oversight and monitoring of that. So you're going to be in an approval process, you're going to be monitoring, that type of thing. So that's not the big problem. The problem that we see most often is when you're a smaller agency. So if you're executive director and you only have one other person really that's working with you, maybe an assistant and a bookkeeper, for instance, and you really don't feel like you have sufficient financial staff. It's really important in those cases that you increase supervision and review of those key functions. And if you feel like you're not really the person to do that, and you don't have the expertise, then either you have to choose to get training so that you do feel more comfortable with those oversight and supervision review policy. Oversight or review procedures, or you have to then go to those more expensive options that we talked about, like hiring additional staff. Also, I'm a big proponent, we talked about this some in our office with management about making some recommendations that using other staff, like whether it's inside the organization or outside the organization. So, I mentioned in even small agencies, usually there's a receptionist or an assistant or something like that. And even, those individuals, it may not be their primary function, but they can help compare invoices to checks, and they can help double check those type of things with very little training. The key thing there is it's important for them to know why they're doing it. They have to have some level of understanding about why they're implementing that control and why they're necessary, so they know when they detect a problem that it's important to let somebody know about that. Also, we have thought of ways of how some small agencies can use people outside of their particular office. If you're a small fee official in Kentucky, and there's many situations in which if you're a sheriff, you have only one bookkeeper. You really don't have a whole lot of options. If you did have money, you want to put them in deputies and get more people on the street. So, in those cases, as far as getting people outside of your agency, we recommend that you go to your county, or you can go to the clerk's office, fee officials, and start, maybe half a day a week, or, you can reconcile each other's books, your bookkeepers in those different agencies can help out. Or again, go to the county government to see if they have any solutions that they can help. If you're really interested, in improving that control, hopefully you'll be able to find somebody who's willing to help. And then, Again, we get into those more expensive options, which is that to hire additional staff or hire consultants, even temps, and that's if it's feasible. But if it's not feasible, we really have to think about ways to branch out and get some additional assistance for free. But this is, I can't stress enough how important this particular weakness is to try to overcome the organizations. Also, I just want to mention, I'm going to say this again in a little bit, but tone at the top, of the organization, you probably heard that a lot. It's no more important than it is here in your financial realm. And if you have an improper segregation of duties in your office, you want to make sure that that individual that has too much segregation knows what your expectations are, that you expect accountability and transparency. And expectations alone ain't enough. You have to really incorporate some of those other processes in order to try to get extra reviews or additional people in the mix. But it's very important. Also, as I mentioned, on those dual signature procedures, you really need to work on strengthening those. I don't know many agencies that have the time to sign all the checks maybe that come through your organization. But if you don't have the time, like I mentioned, you can have an assistant that will do the checking for you. And then you can refuse to sign until that person has done that double check for you. So they're checking invoices to checks and that type of thing, just to make sure that things posted properly. And they can also help with other controls too, look for documentation to make sure that those invoices show what the necessary, why that expense is necessary to your government. So I think that that's an important function. And also, I really would encourage management to mandate and then reiterate that passwords are not to be shared. So I think that's important. If somebody's on vacation and you really can't wait the 2 weeks, then you need to find a way to set up a temporary password for the individual you want to do that function while the person's out, and then establish a time frame for making sure that password gets deactivated. Okay. So segregation of duties, that's our big area. I'm going to be pointing out to a weakness that we see often as unqualified personnel in key roles. And I know if that's going on in the organization, I know you are aware of it. That's something that's difficult to hide, really. If you have somebody that's in a key position in financial management, and they're really not qualified for that position, you probably have more errors or more non-compliance, than you would like in your organization. So when you do have unqualified employees, and I'm not talking about, the need for people to have 4-year degrees, accounting degrees, or CPAs. Some organizations are not so complex that they need all of that. So I'm talking about well-trained staff that understand not just how to perform their job, but why they're performing their functions in the way that they are. So if you don't have qualified employees in financial management roles, then it really significantly increases the risk of serious errors and non-compliance in the organization. And also, those individuals may not have the training or the background to, detect waste, fraud, and abuse. So there you have your key financial management in positions that they can't do really the job that they're hired to do, which is to protect you as the agency head or the official, and to protect their organization. And also, they may have some difficulty preparing for changes in accounting and reporting requirements. And, that's one of those things if you're an agency head, you may not place a lot of emphasis on accurate financial reporting, requirements or the accounting requirements. But the problem is that a lot of people, your public, your constituents, your user groups rely on those reports. So anybody who's been in government for the last decade knows that accounting and reporting requirements are getting more and more complex all the time. Our staff deals with that. We deal with those ever-changing policies and rules and standards that come about in the accounting profession. And I know it's difficult for all financial management in every layer of government to also offset those risks. And that's why it's important to have qualified individuals in those positions. So if there is a change in one of the standards, they can help identify what the impact is on your government and help you move through that. And then another weakness that I want to talk about, excessive and reasonable or allowable spending. And this weakness is Probably the one that most people fear having the auditor show up and find. This is the area where there's a lot of questionable costs, a lot of questionable activities that get raised in audits and examinations. Some of the examples that we've noted in our audits and examinations are things like salaries and wages paid in excess of contracts or employment scales. So we've also seen bonuses paid. We see that more often than you would imagine, considering that it's unconstitutional for employees to receive a bonus. Excessive and unnecessary spending on operating expenses, travel and meals, we see a lot of that. Credit cards that are used against your agency's policy, like, so they may use it for personal items, and even though they may have the intent of repaying that, they're borrowing taxpayer public funds, right? So we want to deter that. Other types of spending problems that we know are double payments of expenses. Like we see expenses that may be paid on a travel card or a credit card, but then also may be reimbursed to the individual through per diems and travel vouchers. So that's a big problem. We see a lot, both in our single audits and in our examinations, that we see a lot of unallowable expenditures charged to federal grants. When I mentioned the complexity of accounting in recent years, you really don't have to go any further than talking to governments who have federal grants or have issued bonds in recent years, because that level of accounting, there's a lot of strings attached to federal programs, and so it's really easy to have non-compliance if you're not keeping up with those type of requirements. Also, we see fringe benefits paid without approval, without the proper approval from either agency head or from your governing bodies. And Brian touched on that some in his session for board governance, and the need to really monitor those type of fringe benefits. And then he also mentioned improper supporting documentation. So, we see things like no receipts or illegible or not modified receipts. He mentioned having tops torn off of receipts. We've seen that type of thing. And we've seen receipts submitted with no itemization. So the government is still, your financial management is still processing these things. So that's the kind of problems that we have. We want to help implement policies and procedures that deter and try to avoid those kind of findings. So again, in correcting this weakness, this is where the tone at the top of your organization is really the most critical. As an agency head, as an elected official, you really need to let your staff know that you expect proper accountability and transparency. So that the rules apply to everybody. That's the kind of tone that you need to set. We've seen a lot of people, and they're very good policy individuals that heading up their organizations or being in elected positions who are very well intended, who will say, I really don't touch that financial management stuff, and somebody else has handled, like I mentioned earlier. If the staff understand, it doesn't take long for staff to understand that that's your position before they start taking you at your word, before they start believing, okay, he's hands off. So if you have somebody in the organization that is, finds themselves in a position where they have the motivation or the justification to commit fraud, some of the times these are very good people, and they just find themselves in positions where they're desperate, and they know that you're an official that's not going to look or care about that type of thing, then they'll take it your word. The other thing that's important here to correct these types of problems or to clarify spending policies, or if you don't have spending policies, as Brian mentioned, you need to create those for both management and your governing body. Those policies should really ensure that you require adequate documentation and approvals, that you establish or you clarify your spending limits on per diems or travel, that type of thing. And also that you're very clear on meals and other food purchases. I'll say that I think that's one of the areas that surprises me the most anyways, how many ways that some agencies will justify paying lunch for employees during a regular working day. It could be that it's a long meeting or it's training, but in general it's a long work day. They're on a travel status, and so we've seen a lot of justification for those. And even though those often don't rise to material limits, those are the types of expenditures that the public really doesn't understand. I mean, they're providing their own meals every day, and so they don't understand why public, employees would be able to get a free meal just for, attending work or attending training. So you have to be really clear about when that's allowed in your government. So correcting this weakness, reimbursement requests should be denied until proper supporting documentation is obtained. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. If you're an agency head, elected official, you really need to support your financial staff in this particular policy, because it's going to be hard to start telling people no when they've been used to another policy that's been lenient. Your financial staff, as we talked about, need to be well trained, and they need to be very knowledgeable of your administrative code, of your statutes, grant agreements, and other policies. They need to make sure that if they're not in attendance to your governing body meetings, they need to read the minutes of those meetings for decisions that impact financial management, such as contract approvals or changes in salaries or fringe benefits and those type of things. The financial staff really should avoid making any change in salaries and benefits without written authorization and appropriate approval. So before, if you are in financial management, you process transactions today, don't accept any verbal change to salaries and fringe benefits. That's something that has to be well documented. Okay, so the last weakness really that I'm going to touch on, Ryan talked some about this in his presentation, that we see this as far as management goes too. There's two sides of this: board governance that may need to be strengthened, and also management's relationship with their governing body. We see a lot of times where there's a failure to provide routine budget to actual reports, detailed list of expenditures. And if you're in county government, those types of things are required of you. You're required to have a detailed list of expenses provided to you in this report. We see the board not really getting information on contracts and bids and projects, and even information on employees. And even when this information isn't necessarily required in your organization, not being asked for by the governing body, it's good to give it to them, because it does build a relationship of trust with your governing body, and I think that's very important. We hear a lot. I think you'd probably be surprised at how many tips, hotline calls that we get from members in those governing bodies, because they get frustrated. They feel like they ask questions or make a request of their management, and they feel like they're getting non-responsive answers or no answers at all. So those types of problems tend to lead to integrity questions. So it's important to build your relationships with your governing body. And so, correcting the weakness, and I think I've talked about this as we've gone along, basically, is improving those relationships. Also, it doesn't hurt to clarify responsibilities of management versus your governing body, so they understand that you as management do have responsibilities that you have to fulfill, but that you're open to some transparency and accountability of your governing body. Also, I want to point out, a lot of times we see that ordinances or decisions of the governing bodies haven't really been codified or put in a place where they are collected in one spot. That's a really important thing that you can do, so no matter whether you're in your day-to-day management operations or whether you're in a meeting of the governing body, you can easily determine what decisions have been made in the past. It gives you a historical record too, so that nobody has to wonder, has the board addressed this in the past, or has management addressed this in the past? So I think that's key. And then periodically invite your financial staff or your external auditors. A lot of people, a lot of agencies do a good job in having their external auditors to explain the audit. But it's also a good idea to have them help provide training to your governing body. So on financial matters, let the external auditors or your financial staff come in and explain certain matters that are important to your agency, how to read your financial statements or matters of compliance. So that's it for me today. I appreciate everybody being here and your time.